Okay.
He's the guy who went to the first meetup. Awesome, thanks a lot. So it went very slow, as you can see. At first, it went very slow, and so the whole point was that I didn't even show up for the first meeting. That's how slow it was, right? And so then we scheduled another one. Stephen and I started communicating by email, and I got to thank Stephen because of the fact that he showed up at that first event. Because if he had not showed up at that first, and then at the second one, which I actually attended, I don't know that I would have organized a third. But he did show up. We had a great conversation at a coffee shop on a Sunday morning, and I eventually became the administrator of the meetup group. And I committed to going to the coffee shop every second Sunday, and Stephen and I committed to being there for at least a year and a half, every second Sunday. So it went slow. I became the administrator. I was able to create my own events, and we committed to the 18 months of meetings. Stephen showed up for about 4, so he was there for about 2 months, and then he dropped out. I think he had a different idea about what we were actually going to do. I was very clear about what I wanted to do, and so I just waited for other people to show up. And we also meet once a month at the pub. So now we're actually up to meeting 3 times a month, twice at the coffee shop and once at the pub. Okay, and now we're up to about 80 members on our Facebook page, and we're up to 50 regular members on the meetup page. And some of our largest meetups have been up to 20 people showing up at the coffee shop. I remember in the beginning saying to different people, I may have even said this to you, Isaac, and I know people who have been around for a while. I said, I don't know what I'll do if 20 people show up. You know, it's just, we're just not scheduled for that many people. It was very small at first. So the plan of action for the Hong Kong Atheist Society has been very clear from the beginning. We now hold business meetings as well, and at our first business meeting back in March, we decided that we would have 2 separate groups. And one of those groups would be the activist group, people who are actually willing to write letters to government, who are willing to go and see members of the LegCo, people who are willing to do protests, people who are willing to actually go out, because I would love to do a protest at the Indonesian consulate right now for Michael Aon. The other group would be social, and that would be more on Facebook, just doing what we already do now. That's getting together at the coffee shop, getting together at the pub, having great conversation, great debates, and we will eventually get there. I know it's not going at light speed right now. It's certainly not where I thought it would be a year ago. I thought by now that for sure we would have official society status. Unfortunately, that's still pending. I've made 2 separate applications, and I have replied to requests for more information 3 times. I'm told by locals that that's just Hong Kong bureaucracy, and I should expect that.
What do you mean you cannot expect to set up the society? We don't need any approval, we just need notification.
Well, thanks for that bit of information. We're in the process of filing for official society status, and that's what we're doing right now. So we're not going to make any official actions until such time that we actually have official society status. So no letters to the editor, no protests, no group events that are known to the general public, no media attention. The whole idea here is that we don't really want to have too much attention before we grow and we figure out exactly our strategies and our purposes and get more numbers. We want to get our philosophy down solid and our strategy before we actually attract any immediate attention. But obviously our first step will be to attract immediate attention to our group. But that's not until we get the official society status. So the objectives of the group are modeled after the Center for Inquiry. Now, if any of you are familiar, anybody here familiar with the Center for Inquiry? Yeah. An outstanding organization, world-class organization. If you are not familiar with it, I suggest you subscribe to their podcasts to start. Point of Inquiry is a brilliantly well-done podcast. The hosts and the guests are always stellar, and their topics are always interesting. The Center for Inquiry is located in Amherst, New York, and they've teamed up with the University of Buffalo, and they have outlets all over the world as well. And you know, ultimately, it'd be fantastic to get a Center for Inquiry branch here in Hong Kong. They have 3 primary objectives, and although I've grossly reworded them here for our own benefit, they're essentially the same. We fully intend to just rob from the Center for Inquiry. We're just going to model ourselves after what they've already done. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. Yeah. This is a stellar organization, and so we're going to model ourselves after them. So the first one that we plan to do, when we talk about those activist and socialist groups, or social groups, the activist group, first of all, speak out on a religion's privileged position in society. This idea that when you say you're an imam or say that you're a priest, you're immediately offered some sort of respect for that. We really want that to end. We want that respect to be evidence-based, not authoritarian-based. So the pushback against religious influence on public policy. I don't care what your religion is, I don't care what your belief systems are, but they shouldn't affect your policy decision making when you get into politics. There should be no religious test. There shouldn't be any religious test for policy or legislation, and there should be no religious test for anyone who wants to be in government. And finally, reduce the stigmatism attached or associated with being a non-believer. And for anyone who is a non-believer, you know that that can be significant at times. The Christians have done a really great job of perpetrating this myth that if you don't believe in the Bible, if you don't read the Bible, that there is no source for your moral code. And that's just hogwash.
No basis.
Yeah, no basis for your moral code. So we really want to push back against that. That's one of our other objectives. Eventually, in terms of the strategy, how we'll actually promote these ideas, eventually we'll host events. And we're already doing that, but at a very social level. So far it's just been fun. But we're getting to know each other. We're establishing, norms. If you know anything about group dynamics, we're definitely in the storming stage right now, just getting to know one another, figuring things out. And we're becoming friends. We're definitely, the people in our group are becoming friends. So eventually we'll have some guest speakers, just like you guys have tonight, but hopefully it'll be something more. I shouldn't say that. Okay, so we'll have guest speakers as well, like yourself, at some point. And public debates is something that I'd really like to do. Really get out there and actually have all-on debates.
But that would be interesting.
Yeah, and as a member, I'd like to do a public debate, but I'd like to do a public debate as a member of an officially recognized Hong Kong atheist society, right?
You just need to recognize yourself.
I do. So the presentations to the members of the LegCo that's all part of the pushing back against religious influence on public policy. I think a lot of members of the legislature, if they've never actually been spoken to by an atheist, if they've never been approached from that perspective, from the secular perspective, they just don't understand the impact that the religious beliefs have on policy. And it's not a matter of majority. Secularism is the only one methodology that is acceptable to all. And so that's why it has to be more secular, and we do presentations. And eventually, I'd like to do what the Center for Inquiry currently does worldwide in the United States mostly. They do a lot of presentations to universities and to high school students, and they do university campus outreach. So they actually have, at the universities, they have secular societies, they have Socratic societies, they have atheist societies, they have Center for Inquiry branches at universities. And I'd really, really like to get those kind of organizations developed here in Hong Kong as well. So there's our regular meetings. Everyone knows her right there. That's Virginia. All right, there's Isaac right there. There's half of Isaac.
And that's Madeline.
This is Wilson Leung. Actually, Wilson is the guy who designed our logo, rather, the jumping sheep. This is Julian. He's a fairly new member. He was a devout Christian up until about 4 months ago. And he went straight from being a devout Christian to coming to coffees with us every second Sunday. So he's a great new addition. And this is Madeline Mock. I'm sure a lot of you guys know Madeline Mock as well.
Yeah.
So this was a Sunday afternoon at the coffee shop after a lot of people had been there. Oh, this is a copy of Christopher Hitchens' book, right there. His latest book of his
collection of
collection.
his essays.
Collection. Yeah.
Is she actually being sworn in as a member?
Yeah, she's being sworn. That's good, David.
That's what I mean.
She's being sworn in as a member on the Christopher Hitchens. It's called what's it called?
Arguably essays?
Yeah, the collection of essays.
Arguably?
Arguably. Thank you very much. Yeah. So this is just a typical Sunday afternoon at the coffee shop. Eventually, we'd like to host a convention. That would be the big deal, right? And in fact, about 5 months ago, we were talking about hosting a convention, right? Like, what can we do? And we contacted the Atheist Alliance International, the AAI, which is a huge global organization with tons of funding and lots of reach and lots of publicity. And they said, we're glad to hear that you're interested in hosting an event in Hong Kong. But because I was going to Melbourne, I went and I spoke to the AAI representatives when I was in Melbourne. And I learned a lot about the process there of hosting a convention of the kind that they've hosted. And it's unlikely that we will ever do anything on that scale here in Hong Kong.
How many people attended?
About 4,000.
Wow. Oh, that's
Yeah, they had 4,000 people at their. And after learning how the process worked, I realized I came back sort of with my tail between my legs because I was very gung ho to have something big here in Hong Kong. It's not going to happen in my lifetime anyway. No way, nothing of that size, right? And it may never happen. Because the more the need for a convention like that actually exists, and I know this sounds like an oxymoron, but the less the need for an convention like that actually exists. Because the more atheism and secularism becomes part of regular society, the less often we will actually need to meet to promote it. It will be self-preserving. So it turns out conference organizers are not the least bit concerned about the logistics of the travelers. I actually thought they were. I thought that they made choices on location based on, you know, what's a really great location that everyone can get to easily. So, what, Hong Kong was a fantastic location, right? We got flights from London, from New York, from Los Angeles, from every major city in the world, direct to Hong Kong every day, multiple flights. I thought this would really work, bring the whole globe together here. Well, as it turns out, when you have one of these conferences, the thing that the conference organizers look for is maximizing the local turnout. So, at the Global Atheist Conference on the 13th, 14th, and 15th in Melbourne, Australia, called the Celebration of Reason, there was about 4,000 attendees. 2,000 of those were from Melbourne. Another 1,000 of those were from Victoria Province. Another 750 were from Australia. There was only 250 people out of the entire 4,000 that came from outside Australia.
But it's nearly impossible to get to Australia.
Well, but
for the rest of the world.
Right, for the rest of the world, right? And that's what I thought when I looked at the at the location of it. I said to myself, this place is at the bottom of the world. Like how someone coming from the East Coast of the United States has to travel a full 30-hour period before they can get to Melbourne, and then their time scale is completely off. However, they recently tried to do the same idea in England. It just didn't work. Because you have to have these conferences in places where people are already interested in attending. There has to be a local draw for this particular topic. People aren't going to draw. If this was a business conference, if I was an accountant and I was going to an accounting conference, then my employer would be paying. It wouldn't matter where it was. But 100% of the attendees, the paying attendees at this conference, they paid out of pocket. Right? So it had to be in a place where the local demand was really, really high. And I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we could have, you know, if I could get 100 people to show up at a speaker event, I would be ecstatic, now that I know the sort of demand that actually exists out there. And there was an amazing collection of speakers, and I think that that's why they drew in so many people. But they chose the right location as well. Melbourne is a hotbed of atheism and secularism. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of groups going on. They're calling it the Athens of the 21st century. Right? There's a lot of exploration of new ideas and experiences. So.
Where is Alexandria then?
Yeah, I guess, okay. So,
Give me Alexandria.
Yeah. Sam Harris was there, a fantastic speaker. Daniel Dennett, these are all the big names that you guys would recognize. Lawrence Krauss really coming onto the scene right now as a brilliant speaker. He's for those guys who don't. Does everybody know who Lawrence Krauss is? Okay, he's a theoretical physicist.
Yeah, a universe from nothing.
Yeah, exactly, a universe from nothing. And he also wrote Quantum Man, and it's just an incredible story of where the beginning of the universe very might well have come from. And his whole approach is that eventually we just won't need a God concept to understand the things that we already understand. Richard Dawkins was there, and Dawkins' speech was like any other speech you would see on YouTube. It wasn't actually interesting or new or anything like that. Dennett and Harris and Krauss really stole the show. But Dawkins did answer a question from someone in the audience. Each speaker took questions after each time they spoke, and Dawkins' knowledge of these topics are so deep that there isn't a question that he can't, that he hasn't already heard or thought about. And you think that people are asking him these really interesting questions, like, yeah, I've never thought about it. What? And he's just reeling off an answer. And someone in the audience asked, what is the evolutionary benefit of music? And why is music such a really important part of our humanity, and yet there doesn't appear to be any evolutionary benefit to it? And his response, although I'm simplifying, and you can see the extended answer on YouTube, was that when you build a computer this complex, there are always going to be things that you can do with it that you've never intended to do, or don't even need to do. but you can now. You know, he talked about building a computer that was capable of calculating, really, really massive equations. He said there's no reason why you couldn't also use that to build maps or to take pictures. Right? That's not what his intended purpose was, but it would be able to do that. It would have the capacity. So our brain has the capacity for a lot more than just what we need, evolutionarily speaking, because it's grown so big. Eugenie Scott.
But there are functions.
Yes, you have to point out that they talk about the neuroscience of it is our brains are so complex because we have to manipulate things. It's just to drive our body.
Because I think you should read a book about.
Hey, how about I talk?
Yeah.
There are documented functions.
I'm sure there are, and when I'm finished my talk, we'll have a conversation about it.
Okay.
Okay. So Eugenie Scott's somebody else I'd really like to draw your attention to if you guys don't know Eugenie Scott. She's actually the executive director for the National
Center for Science Education, NCSE.
Yeah, fantastic. She had a great talk. She speaks a lot about evolution and the purpose of evolution, and she works really hard to make sure that creationism stays out of the schools. Right, so that's a really important person to look up if you haven't had a chance. There's just a photo of the inside of the room. I didn't know how many of these I should put in, but it gives you an idea of how big the place was. I mean, it held 4,000 people, so you can understand that it was a big facility. And on these screens up here, this is where they would show the people that were on the stage. I had great seats. I was right down front almost every day. It was really great. Fantastic facility, absolutely beautiful facility, right on the river in Melbourne. And then the talks were truly inspiring. All the talks can now be found on YouTube. So you can go and you can listen to Dawkins' answers to that question, and then you can comment on it there. Right? You can let Dawkins know what you think about his answer. But I was just impressed by the idea that it didn't matter what questions came from the audience. Every speaker was prepared and ready. So if you're going to look for these guys on YouTube, look for it under a Celebration of Reason. I highly recommend the Daniel Dennett speech. And I do that because, has anybody seen it yet? From a Celebration of Reason? Okay, so he does this really great routine where he says, he talks about you may be an atheist if. And he talks about this incredible phenomenon of the brain, the name of which I can't remember, but you can look it up on the YouTube video, which is essentially a denial of blindness. Because people who become...
Mind's eye? Mind's eye?
Yes, exactly. It's a denial of blindness. So people have an accident or suddenly become blind from a disease, and they actually deny that they are blind. And they will continue to operate in this way for 5-6 days before they can be finally convinced. And the reason he's so interested in this is because he wants to get these people, when they're in this state, under the MRI. He wants to look at their brain. He wants to know what part of the brain is dominating their rationalism. What part of the brain is saying, ignore all inputs, go with what you believe to be true.
Ignore all the evidence, overwhelming.
Everyone else it's obvious to everyone else that you're blind, but you're in a state of, and your mind, just like you say, inside your mind you can still see everything. But of course you can. It takes several days. I definitely recommend...
There's also the phenomenon of the phantom limb.
Yep, absolutely.
People have lost their arm.
It's the same concept, but in this particular case, this is an absolute denial of reality, without any mental illness associated with it. A complete denial of reality. So, some would say, that's what religious faith is. So Lawrence Krauss, Sam Harris, Eugenie Scott, check them out. And basically, this is the same as the last slide. The only thing on here is the idea that I'm not really a fan of P.Z. Myers. I don't think that P.Z. Myers made himself any friends at the conference in Australia. P.Z. Myers has divided the entire world up into two groups, atheists and everybody else. Right? And he talks that way. And he's belittling of people of faith. And I don't think it buys him any friends. The real hard hitters in the atheist group, the people who really want their heroes to get up there and put down the other team, they're the people who love them, but I'm not really a big fan of them. So obviously you know who these guys are. This is Sam Harris, this is Daniel Dennett, and that's me. I have to admit though, I was not an average participant at the event. I'm fairly assertive, I'm fairly aggressive. And so I made sure that I did meet these guys. I actually crashed the party, the after party that was just organizers and just speakers. Me and my friend, who I think is in a picture here in a few minutes, we found out where it was, and we went, and we busted in. And it was fantastic, because it was a room with about 50 people, and about 20 of them were the speakers at the conference. So we had unlimited access to these guys. We had fantastic conversations with them. So it was an amazing, amazing experience. It was fun to just to listen to these guys talk about simple things.
Simple things of life.
For me, it humanized them. They're no longer a feature on YouTube or the author of a book. It was great conversation. Just listening to them talk to each other was an education in itself. This is Lawrence Krauss. Lawrence Krauss's ex-wife and I are actually from the same place in Nova Scotia. And so that came up. We talked about being from this. I'd read that on Wikipedia before I went. And so we talked about Nova Scotia, which is where I grew up, and the fact that his ex-wife is from Nova Scotia. And they're still on good terms. I actually knew that from one of his interviews with on Point of Inquiry, actually. Yeah, and he recently wrote a book called, like you said, A Universe from Nothing. But prior to that, I highly recommend his book called Quantum Man. Fantastic book about Richard Feynman. This guy right here, his name is Dan Barker, and I haven't mentioned him yet. Maybe you know that guy there too. Maybe some of you have seen it. But this was my friend right here. We just became conference friends. We just happened to sit down beside each other on the same day. We were both there by ourselves. He's a physician from Sydney. We started talking, and then we hang around each other, had lunch together, drinks together, and then on the last day we were like, we just got to be an after party, and we need to find out where it is. And we did, and we tracked those guys down, and it was fantastic. But this guy here, Dan Barker, he does a lot of work with the ACLU. And so I had a long conversation with him about funding of religious institutions abroad by the U.S. government. They do a lot of sneaky sort of funding of organizations when they're abroad. Consulates and embassies can get away with a lot more. And the Hong Kong consulate's the biggest consulate in the world of any country in any location. And they have a lot of money invested in religious institutions here in Hong Kong. And so I'm trying to get the ACLU to take on Hong Kong International School. And Richard Dawkins, you can see he's standing there by himself. It was kind of interesting. I didn't even know how to approach him. I didn't even really know how to have a conversation with him. I didn't even know what I would say. There was like so much not in common. Anything I would say would be embarrassing. So I just went over, I thanked him for coming to the conference, taking his time to come to the conference, and that I enjoyed his talk, and that it's always inspiring, and that his book basically changed the course of my life. And said thanks, and I'm sure he's heard that 10,000 times. That's basically the after party. This guy right here, does anybody recognize this guy right here? Does anybody know who this guy is? This guy's incredibly famous on YouTube. He has a series of videos on YouTube called Mr. Deity. And they're comedy skits that are all about pre-creation. He plays God. And he has, do you know this guy?
I've seen that.
Okay, so he plays God, and then he has a whole bunch of other people who, one person plays Jesus Christ, another person plays the Holy Spirit, another person plays the devil, and they're all sitting around and they're having regular conversations about how they're going to create the world and how it's going to all turn out. And he regularly refers to something he calls the script, which of course is the Bible. And he's quite hilarious. Just the whole concept that he runs through is absolutely hilarious. And I've been watching his videos for a long time and really enjoying him. But how I met him is more fun because I was actually coming back from having some beers on Friday night from the pub that was very nearby, and I was walking past the convention center, and there was this huge mob of people, at least 100 people, all standing around in a circle, all looking in towards the middle. And in the middle was Brian Dalton and an evangelist. And the evangelist and Brian Dalton were having a conversation. I don't think the evangelist actually understood that Brian Dalton was a comedian. And of course, everything the evangelist would say, Dalton would have some sort of reply. He'd have a canned response, and it was already a joke that most of us had already even heard. And it was stand-up comedy right there on the street. And so it was fantastic. It was a lot of entertainment. And actually, over the course of the conference, I actually ended up spending more time with him than anybody else. Although the access to these guys was open, it was fantastic. I couldn't believe how generous they were with their time, considering how busy they were. I ran into Sam Harris 4 or 5 times throughout the conference, and each time he was willing to stop and speak. Brian Dalton is actually an ex-Mormon, and so we talked for about 2 hours about Mormonism, and he gave me a lot of insights into the faith, how it's organized, and what it's like to not be a Mormon after having been a Mormon. And he actually straightened me out on a lot of myths. There's a lot of myths out there about Mormonism. I didn't tell you, but there were shoulder events. There was the before and after events. And although the conference went from Friday night to Sunday afternoon, on Monday evening, they had an event, the Rationalist Society of Australia had an event called The Road Less Traveled. And I went to see this. And you guys probably recognize This guy right here, right? PZ Myers. Right, PZ Myers, he has a blog and a website called Pharyngula, which is incredibly popular amongst atheists. It's most popular amongst biology students, and he has a real following. And he's the guy I was talking about who's divided the whole world into, it's basically binary for him, right? There are believers, there are non-believers, and then there are idiots in his world. That's the way he believes it. And he's really pushy about that, because he talks about the in-group and the out-group structure. And this video is actually on YouTube as well if you want to watch it. He says there is no way for us to get our point across without having an in-group and an out-group. Right? There has to be a way, there has to be a group who is the target of our ridicule. This woman, her name's Leslie Cannell. She is a lawyer in Australia, and she has a great blog as well if you want to read it. She just fights a lot against creationism in school. But this is the guy I really want to tell you about. If I could tell you anything, I had to tell you all that other stuff about the conference, because that's fairly standard stuff. But this guy right here, to me, was the real discovery at the event. This was a guy who I had never heard of before. And on the Thursday before the event, he spoke for about an hour and a half at a place called the Wheeler Center. And Alex, I know that you know who he is, right? His name is Chris Stedman. You know Chris Stedman? Okay, so Chris Stedman recently wrote a book called Atheists. And I strongly suggest that you read his stuff and look him up. If you're like-minded, it's the way I am. And that is that the whole objective of this is to find some common ground. Right, to figure out what we actually have in common, forget about the things that we don't actually have in common, and make a common field that we can settle. That is his whole philosophy. At his talk on Thursday before the lunch, he
what did he talk about?
Well, he talked about his book, Atheist, and his whole experience of there was absolutely no religion in his home when he was being brought up, no discussion of it whatsoever, and I'll talk about that in a second. But at his talk, when he finished talking about his book, he took questions from the audience, and somebody was basically saying, so like, well, what's your purpose? What are you going to do if you have no faith? What are you going to do? Which is a very common question that people of faith ask people without faith, right? And he said, I guide my life on a quote from Stephen Hawking, a quote I'd never heard from myself, and that's why I say this for me was the gem of the event. He said, "We should seek the greatest value of our action." Apparently this is something that Stephen Hawking said. Stephen Hawking, in an interview or in a blog or in an article somewhere, stated emphatically, there is no heaven, there is no hell, there is no God, there is no afterlife. There are none of these things. Now, he doesn't have any demonstrable proof for that, but Stephen Hawking doesn't care. And someone of faith asked him the same thing that we all get asked. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What's the purpose of your life, right? And he said, we should just seek the greatest value of our action. And I sort of used that as a guide for myself ever since then. So Chris Stedman wrote a book called Atheist. It's how an atheist found common ground with the religious. And his talk for me was very inspiring. And the way that he handled PZ Myers on Monday night at the Rationalist Society event was excellent. And Alex, I can send you links to all of the videos of all of the events that we're talking about here, so you can watch them yourself. Chris Stedman's video is on the Wheeler Center, and the other one is the Rationalist Society of Australia. So it's a great story, and you asked about what did he talk about. He basically had no religion in his home at all. When he was a teenager, he got evangelized by some neighbors, and he was converted to Christianity, and he became an evangelist himself. And then he deconverted when he found out that there was no room for homosexuality in Christianity. So he got out of that, right? And then he became an atheist. And then when he was in university, he started an organization that was meant to be an outreach, a bridge between atheist organizations and faith-based organizations. These are quotes directly from the Wheeler Center page where he spoke. So he's an atheist working to foster positive and productive dialogue between faith communities and the non-religions. And that's basically, that's what I would like to do. I would like to...
That's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
That's what UUHK is trying to do too.
Fantastic. So, and the book charts his journey from evangelical Christian and closeted gay person to anti-religious atheist, interfaith activist. It details his work as a young, proud gay atheist who is building bridges of understanding, cooperation, and respect with religious people. I think these are good values. I like the way that Chris Stedman was going. He argues that it is fundamental that atheists and the religious engage their differences in a thoughtful and compassionate manner. Engage their differences. Right there. I really believe in that. That's what we need to talk about. We talk about what makes us different. Where do we get our values from? Why are you so different than me? And then look for that common ground so that we might collaborate. Excellent symposium. I suggest you watch the video. At one point during the symposium, I almost yelled out as P.Z. Myers was speaking, and he was so infuriated, he almost yelled out, "Bullshit," because he was just, the stuff he was spewing was just such nonsense. But I didn't have to. She did. Well, after something he said, she called him on it, and I was like, yes, thanks. So, my own personal philosophy. So the three things I said I would talk about, right? Talk about the Hong Kong Atheist Society, my trip to Melbourne. That pretty well sums it up. Chris Stedman was the gem for me. If I could take one thing away, it wasn't any of the major speakers. My experience of meeting Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, and I could go on and on because it was overwhelming. It was amazing. But Chris Stedman was the man who inspired me and impressed me the most. But my meetup description actually doesn't use the word atheist. I don't refer to myself as an atheist. I know I'm the president of the Hong Kong Atheist Society, but I don't use that word to describe myself. Everyone else used that word to describe me, and I'm not at all uncomfortable with that, because it's the most appropriate word. It is the word that we agree on, right? But the reality is that I don't know what you have to do to be an atheist. I don't know what the action is that you take to be an atheist, right? I mean, this is the Sam Harris thinking, really, from 5 years ago, right? But others would definitely describe me as one. I feel as if I can't describe myself in any religious term, and that's where I started tonight. And atheism is a lack of belief. I don't have a lack of belief. I'm indifferent. I am completely indifferent to the existence of God. I don't care. It's not relevant in my life at all. That doesn't make me an atheist. An atheist is someone who actively doesn't believe. I don't care. I don't put any of my time into belief or non-belief. It's an irrelevant conversation. I don't make wishes. I don't put teeth under my pillow. When asked whether or not I believe, I often respond, what do you mean by belief? If you mean, do I base any important decisions upon the possible existence of an afterlife? No, I don't believe. Not once ever in my entire life have I ever been motivated by the chance to go to heaven, or demotivated by the chance I might go to hell. It's never entered into my decision-making process. And this is someone who was a Catholic until 5 years ago. Right? I went to church every single Sunday morning, but heaven and hell just never was part of my life. I just didn't believe it from day one. And I actually thought most people didn't believe it too. It wasn't until I became an adult and started asking serious questions. I was like, you believe this? I have an opinion about religion and gods. Yeah, I have an opinion. But I also have an opinion about one country, two systems. And I have an opinion about the effectiveness of democracy as practiced by Americans. Does this mean I believe in these? Do I believe in one country, two systems? Do I believe in the way that democracy is practiced? It's not belief. I don't care. It has no effect on me. I won't make a decision about what I have for dinner tonight based on whether or not I believe in these things. They don't affect my life. I do actively ridicule people with faith. And that's what probably makes me most closest to what people would call an atheist. Right? Because I do actively ridicule. And I made a decision about writing that on my meetup page. You know, my description. I actively ridicule people of faith. Particularly people of faith that use it as a means of making important decisions and who subject their children to their personal beliefs. I am like Richard Dawkins, and I shouldn't say I'm like Richard Dawkins. I believe what Richard Dawkins says, or I support what he says when he says that teaching your children that prayer is an effective means of dealing with issues is immoral. I believe that. That is immoral. It's not an effective means of dealing with your issues, and it's been proven to be ineffective over and over. Take action. The reason I come to this philosophy of being indifferent about God and not being an atheist and this Chris Stedman approach to the world is because it is a pluralistic world. And as much as I don't like P.Z. Myers, he has a place in all of this. He's a cheerleader. You know, he's a go team go guy, right? And there will always be those people who are drawn to him, right? But we have to admit that it's in a pluralistic world. We have to admit that we live in a world dominated by Christianity and Muslim and faith. We live in a world dominated by faith. And if we're going to operate in that world, then we have to cross the bridge in that world. It's organized religion that wants us to bring everyone together. It's organized religion that wants to put us all under one system of belief. So I think I'd be a hypocrite if I was to say I'm the kind of atheist who wants everyone to be an atheist. You cannot overestimate my apathy about what you believe. I don't care what people believe. It's irrelevant to me. I care about how people behave and how they act and how they treat their children and how they make decisions in society. And if all of that crazy faith makes them make bad decisions, then I'll see it go. Because one belief system is totalitarianism, and I don't want that. That's not what I'm looking for. I don't want atheism to be the one dominant idea. I recently received an email from someone. It may have even been someone in the Unitarian group or someone who knows me on the Facebook page. I meet a lot of people, I sometimes forget their names, but someone sent me an email and invited me to their church to try and convert people to Christianity. I'm sorry, from Christianity. Sorry, from Christianity. Tried to ask me to come with them to their church. And I wrote back to them and I said, I would be happy to do that as soon as you can come up with a real valid argument as to why the fuck I would want to spend my time converting Christians to atheism. I don't care what they believe. That's not my goal. I never got a response. I'm not surprised. But I'm not here to convert anybody to atheism. That's not my role. That's not the goal of the organization either. That's why I started off with the purposes. That's not the goal of the Center of Inquiry. That's the goal of the Hong Kong Atheist Society. I want to reduce the influence of irrational thinking, sorry, on the way people make decisions. That's the ultimate goal of the society, is to reduce irrational thinking.
Or maybe to bring about, or to promote
Rational thinking, but to reduce the influence of irrational thinking. Because here's what we know. Here's what we know. We don't think rationally. People are not rational consumers, either of information or decision. It's in reducing irrational, because I know that we're irrational animals. We're deeply irrational. I want to make people question the validity of statements made by others. I want to encourage them to do that. I want them to understand what makes a statement valid. And I want to create an environment for discussion. And this last goal, wanting to create an environment for discussion, it's what I've already done. That's what we do. That's what we do when we meet, right, Chester? That's what we do when we meet, Isaac, Kevin, right? This is what we do.
Yep.
We have discussion. You've been there, Virginia? That's what it's all about. So it's already created the environment for discussion. And we meet regularly, we have great discussions, discuss a wide variety of topics. Suresh and I have just ended a massive debate about why imperialism is good. He's still not convinced, being of Indian descent. Right?
I can understand that.
So we challenge each other in a healthy way, right? We force each other to make your point valid, right? Use your logic, use your facts, use all that sort of stuff, and we have really great, well, I think they're great anyway. I really enjoy them. I get a lot out of them. We're practicing the art of discussion. We really are. And in fact, recently in a discussion with Madeline, who's been very earlier, I just played the part of the dumb Christian, and we went through a great conversation. We support one another with ideas and with projects. Chester's working on a great project right now, which I'm trying to support, but I'm running out of time. We share ideas, share experiences. We're just sharing life. There's a lot of people who tell you, that sounds a lot like a religion. Well, it's not really a religion because it's not based on faith, but we do get together in the same kind of way. I mean, a big part of why people like religion in their life is because they get together with community, people who are like-minded. And even if they're not like-minded, they'll pretend for that day, for that couple of hours on Sunday, right, just to be part of that group. To always be in the group, to be accepted, right? And so at one of the meetings, Darrell Brown, he asked me a question, which I still think about a lot. And to me, it was like the whole purpose of having these group meetings where people asked each other really tough questions. And I have not yet come up with a reasonable answer to this question. He asked me, what evidence would be sufficient for me to start believing in a supernatural being or an afterlife? And I have no idea. I have no idea what kind of evidence. Because I'm sure 200 years ago, it would have been different than it is today, and 200 years from now it'll be different. It'll always change what evidence. Because any evidence later disproved it, I would just think it was a magical trick. Anything anyone did, I would just assume was magic. Even if someone appeared before me right now and said, here I am, I'm God. I'd say, that's a magic trick. Where's James Randi? He's out there somewhere. Right? I wouldn't believe it. Right? And I have to think about this question a lot. Because the thing that I have to convince myself, I have to make sure that even my skepticism is rational. I have to make sure that I'm being skeptical for the right reasons. I have to make sure it's not just a bad habit. I have to make sure that I'm not just questioning everything for no reason.
But then there's an argument which says that the basis of reason is not reason.
Well, there you go. So the basis of life is death. The basis of the beginning is the end. The basis of up is down. So in the end, what I hope is that we all become babblers. That's the objective, right? I've been babbling now here for a good 30 minutes. Wow, holy cow, look at the time. I've been babbling. But the objective is all to become babblers. But the Arabian babblers that I showed in the beginning, right? Is that eventually everyone, when they know that it's not right, will fight to be at that position where it says, you know, listen, I'm going to speak out about this. I know that I'm taking a risk. I know that this puts me on the outer edge of the group, but I'm going to fight for that chance to speak out. I'm going to take that risk because it'll make me more dominant. It'll make me. It'll give me an important position in the group. Babblers are often eaten by hawks when they stand up on the highest branch, but it's worth it.
You say that you don't believe in anything.